I never thought weeds could get me evicted from my own home, but when you live under the rule of a homeowners association, especially one run by people who think they're royalty, anything is possible. My name is Jack Rollins, and this is the story of how a petty war over my front lawn turned into a full-blown scandal that brought down an entire HOA. It started with weeds, but it ended with federal charges, lawsuits, and a whole lot of very angry homeowners who had no idea their dues were being funneled into someone's personal vacation fund. Let me take you back to the beginning. I moved into Oak Hill Lakes 3 years ago. It was a quiet, gated community in North Carolina with big trees, cobblestone sidewalks, and signs that said "Peaceful Living" in cursive script. At first, it was great. The neighbors waved, the streets were clean, and the HOA fees, while steep, seemed worth it. Until I got on their radar. My first warning came in the form of a letter. It was printed on heavy cream-colored paper, like they thought they were running a country club. It said I was in violation of lawn maintenance standards because there were too many unauthorized plant species in my front yard. Translation: I had a few weeds. Nothing serious, just dandelions and some crabgrass near the mailbox. I pulled them up the next day, watered the lawn, even trimmed the bushes while I was at it. But then came a second letter. This time it said I was being fined $75 per day until the lawn met visual compliance with the neighborhood standard. The letter wasn't signed by anyone, it was just stamped with the Oak Hill Lakes HOA seal. I tried calling the number they listed, but no one ever picked up. I sent an email, no response. So I showed up to the monthly HOA meeting in person. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who likes public confrontations. I work in cybersecurity, so most of my day is spent behind a keyboard, but I wasn't about to pay hundreds of dollars over a couple of weeds. When I entered the meeting, it was like stepping into a courtroom. There were 6 board members sitting at a long table, all with nameplates and folders. The room had folding chairs set up for residents, and only 4 people had shown up, including me. The board president, a wiry man named Carl with silver glasses and a permanent frown, welcomed everyone with the same warmth as a tax audit. I waited my turn, then stood up and explained the situation. I had fixed the lawn, there were no weeds anymore, and I wanted the fine removed. Carl didn't even look at me when he responded. Fines accrue until visual reinspection and approval by the compliance committee, he said. You'll need to pay the current balance before the committee will review your case. That's when I realized something was very wrong. They were setting rules in a way that made it impossible to win. I asked who was on the compliance committee. Carl said that information was internal. I asked when inspections happened. At the discretion of the board, he said. I went home furious. That's when I started digging. I pulled out the HOA bylaws, which had been mailed to me in a welcome packet when I moved in. It turns out the board had wide-reaching powers, too wide. They could fine, place liens, and even begin eviction proceedings for non-compliance. But it also said something interesting. Every homeowner had a right to see the association's financial records if they requested them in writing. So I wrote that request. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office, which was a tiny building near the community pool. The only person there was Denise, the HOA secretary. She looked flustered when I handed her the letter, almost like she didn't know what to do with it. She promised to pass it along. 2 weeks went by. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, I received a notice of lien. Apparently, My weed fine had ballooned to over $2,000 and the HOA was initiating foreclosure proceedings. That's when it stopped being just annoying and became personal. My house was fully paid off. No mortgage. I bought it after cashing out on a startup I'd worked at for 5 years. There was no way I was going to let these people threaten my home over crabgrass. So I filed a countersuit in small claims court to dispute the fines, and I included a request for financial transparency under HOA law. This time, things got interesting. Just days after filing, I received an email from someone I didn't know. The subject line read, "Watch your back. Carl doesn't like you digging." There was no name, but the message said, "You're not crazy. Look into the treasurer's reports for the last 2 years. Start with the landscaping contracts." I felt a chill go down my spine. It sounded like someone inside the HOA was trying to blow the whistle, anonymously. I didn't know who, but I took the advice. I returned to Denise at the HOA office and said I was legally entitled to view financials. This time, I didn't leave until she printed them out for me. There was a stack of spreadsheets and scanned invoices. Most of it was boring stuff: maintenance, pool cleaning, water bills. But one name kept showing up over and over again: Green Roots Landscaping, Inc. Green Roots had billed the HOA nearly $90,000 in the last year alone. That seemed excessive, even for a large neighborhood. So I looked them up. They had no website, no listed address, just a P.O. box. That's when I got suspicious. I did some digital digging: public records, business licenses, state filings. What I found made my jaw drop. Green Roots Landscaping was a shell company registered to Brenda McMillan. Brenda just happened to be the HOA treasurer. Brenda McMillan. That name jumped off the page like a red flag on fire. I had seen her once before, sitting quietly at the end of the HOA board table during meetings. She never said much, just nodded when Carl spoke and signed off on whatever paperwork was passed around. I'd assumed she was just another retired neighborhood busybody. Turns out she was a lot more than that. With the Green Roots Shell Company now linked to her, I knew something shady was happening. I printed out the state registration documents, the business license showing her name, and every single HOA invoice that mentioned Green Roots. There were dozens: mowing, irrigation, leaf blowing, fertilization, even charges for emergency tree assessments that didn't make any sense. But I wasn't just going to throw around accusations. I needed solid proof, and I knew exactly where to get it: the bank records. If Brenda was funneling HOA money into a fake company she controlled, the paper trail would be in the deposits. I needed a copy of the HOA's bank statements. That's where things got tricky. Bank records aren't part of the standard documents a homeowner can request. But I figured if I applied enough pressure, legal pressure, they'd have no choice but to comply. So I amended my small claims suit, citing a breach of fiduciary duty and demanding full financial transparency, including bank transactions. And then everything went quiet. No calls, no emails, no HOA letters, not even another weed citation. It felt like the calm before a storm. I kept digging. Turns out, Brenda's husband, Earl McMillan, owned a small landscaping outfit a few towns over that had gone out of business 5 years ago. I found an old Yelp page full of one-star reviews: missed appointments, shoddy work, poor communication. One review even said, "They never showed up, but we still got billed." Sound familiar? Meanwhile, back in Oak Hill Lakes, the mood had started to shift. A few neighbors who'd been friendly before were now avoiding eye contact. One guy even crossed the street to avoid walking past my house. I figured Carl must have started whispering into people's ears, spinning a story about how I was disruptive or threatening legal action. Classic deflection tactics. Then, 3 days before my court hearing, I received another anonymous email. This one had attachments. It was a scanned copy of a Green Roots invoice with a handwritten note at the bottom that read, "Drop $2,000 into personal checking, usual." The note was signed simply B. Attached to that was a screenshot of a bank transfer confirmation from the HOA account to a Wells Fargo account registered to Brenda McMillan. Boom! That was the smoking gun I needed. But the most shocking part? The file info revealed the document had been scanned at the HOA office printer. Someone on the inside had officially flipped. With that kind of evidence, I knew small claims court wasn't going to be enough. This wasn't just a violation of HOA rules, this was embezzlement, plain and simple. I contacted a local attorney who specialized in HOA litigation and white-collar fraud. When I showed him the documents, he immediately raised his eyebrows. "You've got them," he said. "Dead to rights. This could get criminal." We filed for an injunction to freeze the HOA's bank account pending a forensic audit. And that's when all hell broke loose. The very next day, I got a letter hand-delivered by a private security guard. Yes, security. It was from the HOA board and said that my continued harassment and libelous accusations had made me a threat to the safety and cohesion of the Oak Hill Lakes community. They were initiating eviction proceedings under the HOA's Emergency Authority Clause. Let me repeat that. They were trying to evict me because I caught their treasurer stealing. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who just laughed. "This is retaliation," he said. "They're panicking, which means we're right over the target." We filed a countersuit the next morning, this time in civil court. Allegations: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, misuse of HOA funds, and retaliatory abuse of authority. I also subpoenaed bank records from Green Roots and Brenda's personal accounts. Meanwhile, word started getting out. A few homeowners had overheard Brenda and Carl arguing at the HOA clubhouse. Someone else saw Carl loading boxes into his car in the middle of the night. And then there were the resignations. First went Denise, the secretary who'd given me the financials. Then the vice president stepped down for personal reasons. Within a week, half the board had either quit or gone silent. The court granted our motion to freeze the HOA account pending investigation, which meant no more ridiculous landscaping charges, no more fines, no more lawsuits. But more importantly, we got access to the full records. What we found was staggering. Over the past 3 years, nearly $370,000 had been paid to Green Roots. Of that, at least $180,000 had been moved into personal accounts belonging to Brenda and Earl McMillan. The rest? Gone. Used for everything from first-class flights to Las Vegas, to personal property taxes on a cabin in Asheville, to designer handbags charged to a maintenance credit card. This wasn't just fraud. This was a full-blown criminal conspiracy masquerading as an HOA board. The DA's office didn't need much convincing. Once their white-collar crimes unit reviewed the evidence, they opened a formal investigation within 72 hours. I got a call from a detective named Maria Gonzalez, who specialized in municipal and HOA-related fraud. "I've seen shady boards before," she told me during our first phone call, "but this is organized theft, not just negligence. You did half our job for us, Jack." By the end of the week, subpoenas were flying. Brenda McMillan was called in for questioning, along with Carl, two remaining board members, and their bookkeeper, some woman named Marcia, who had been writing checks blindly for over a year. It wasn't long before the media got wind of it. Channel 4 out of Raleigh ran a segment titled "HOA Fraud Scandal in Oak Hill Lakes, Treasure Under Fire After Homeowner Blows Whistle." The piece featured blurred-out images of Brenda and clips of my house with a voiceover talking about a resident who discovered financial inconsistencies after being cited for weeds. I didn't mind staying anonymous. At that point, I wasn't after fame. I just wanted the board brought to justice. But even as the investigation picked up steam, the retaliation didn't stop. Brenda lawyered up and went on the offensive. Her attorney tried to paint me as a disgruntled homeowner with a vendetta, claiming I doctored documents and coerced witnesses. It was laughable, especially since most of the evidence came from their own files. Still, the HOA sent another letter to every resident claiming that I was sabotaging community cohesion and jeopardizing services with my witch hunt. I wasn't surprised. Cornered rats always bite back. But here's what really turned the tide: a board meeting. The board had no choice but to call an emergency public meeting after 3 more resignations drained their leadership. This wasn't just a formality. It was the first time the community would gather with full knowledge of what was happening. And boy, was it packed. Over 150 residents crowded into the clubhouse. Some had printed copies of the news article, others had spreadsheets of HOA fees over the years. I walked in late, trying to avoid becoming the center of attention, but people noticed. Carl stood at the front, trying to control the crowd. Brenda wasn't even there, probably advised to lay low by her lawyer. Carl's voice cracked over the microphone. "We're aware of the allegations being spread by Mr. Jack Thomas." Someone cut him off. "Allegations? That woman stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where's the money, Carl? Why are we paying $10,000 a month for lawn mowing?" The meeting unraveled fast. What Carl thought would be a chance to blame me turned into a full-blown mutiny. People were furious. One elderly woman said she'd lived in Oak Hill Lakes for 22 years and had never felt so betrayed. A younger couple who'd just bought their house said they were terrified their property values were about to tank. That's when I stepped forward. "I didn't want any of this," I said. "All I wanted was to be left alone." But when I looked into that weed fine, I found something a lot uglier. And now the DA is investigating. The board has failed us. We need new leadership. We need accountability. The room erupted in applause. A few residents motioned to dissolve the current board altogether. That night, a vote passed unanimously to suspend all HOA authority until the audit and legal process were complete. A temporary committee of 5 neutral homeowners was installed to manage day-to-day affairs. And just like that, the old guard was gone. But the story was far from over. Brenda and Earl were arrested 2 weeks later, charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, falsifying public records, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The bookkeeper Marcia took a plea deal in exchange for testimony. Carl, who hadn't pocketed money directly but was complicit in hiding the transactions, faced civil penalties, and was banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. The DA's office froze Brenda's assets, including that cabin in Asheville. Turns out it had been purchased entirely with HOA funds. They seized the designer handbags, jewelry, and a $65,000 Range Rover parked in her driveway. The best part? Nearly $210,000 was recovered and returned to the HOA account. Meanwhile, my civil countersuit moved forward. With the fraud proven and the retaliatory eviction attempt on record, the judge awarded me a settlement that covered all my legal fees, property damages, and a bit more for emotional distress. That check came to just under $48,000. I didn't keep it. Instead, I worked with the newly formed HOA Reform Committee to use the funds for a community renovation. New benches for the lake trail, playground upgrades, and a community garden. The irony of which didn't escape me. Weeds had started all of this. Now they were growing tomatoes and sunflowers instead of scandal. Life in Oak Hill Lakes slowly stabilized. Neighbors who once avoided me started waving again. People knocked on my door to thank me. A few even asked if I'd consider running for the new HOA board. I declined. I'd done what I came to do. I uncovered the truth, stood my ground, and helped a broken community rebuild itself. But I did keep one thing as a reminder: a framed copy of that original weed citation letter hanging right next to my front door. It reads, "You are in violation of HOA Ordinance 8B. Please remove all visible weeds from your lawn within 10 days to avoid further penalties." Underneath it, in my own handwriting, I wrote, "And they thought the weeds were the problem." The scandal in Oak Hill Lakes didn't just make waves, it sent a shockwave across the entire county. What began as a petty citation over some untrimmed weeds had snowballed into a criminal case that was now featured on every local news channel, several national blogs, and even a short piece on 60 Minutes Online titled "The Weeds That Exposed a $1 Million HOA Scandal." I woke up one morning to find a news van parked at the end of my street. The reporter, a sharp and energetic woman named Tasha Lynn, met me in my driveway with a camera crew and a surprisingly empathetic tone. "We've seen HOA horror stories," she said, "but what you did, how you uncovered this, it's something else." I gave a short interview, reluctantly. I wasn't seeking the spotlight, but I realized something important. If I didn't speak up now, the narrative could easily be twisted. So I told my side of the story: how I was fined over weeds, how I started digging into the HOA's financials, and how that search uncovered Brenda's embezzlement. I made sure to mention the good folks in the neighborhood who backed me up, the honest residents who felt just as betrayed as I did. This wasn't about me. It was about accountability. The interview aired that night, and the response was staggering. Emails started flooding in from homeowners across the country. One man from Colorado wrote, "Our HOA fined me $3,000 for painting my shutters a slightly different shade of brown. I always suspected something shady was going on. Your story gave me the courage to start digging." A woman from Florida messaged, "They tried to ban my wheelchair ramp. Now I'm lawyering up. Thank you." It was surreal. I'd gone from being a nobody in a Carolina suburb to the unofficial face of a grassroots anti-HOA movement. Even more surprising was what happened 2 weeks later. I got a call from State Senator Miriam Briggs. At first I thought it was a prank, but her aide confirmed it. Senator Briggs, who had been working on transparency legislation around HOA governance, wanted to meet with me in person. Apparently, my story had inspired several lawmakers to take a harder look at how HOAs operated and how easily they could abuse power with little oversight. She invited me to testify at a special legislative hearing in Raleigh. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense. The chamber was packed with journalists, homeowners, and a handful of visibly nervous HOA lobbyists. Senator Briggs introduced me. Mr. Thomas is a resident of Oak Hill Lakes who discovered financial fraud within his HOA while fighting an unfair citation. His diligence led to the criminal prosecution of multiple board members. We believe his experience can inform meaningful reform. I wasn't a polished speaker, but I told them everything. I talked about the fake lawn care invoices, the suspicious maintenance contracts, and how easy it had been for a handful of corrupt individuals to steal from hundreds of families without anyone noticing. Then I dropped the bomb. What happened to me isn't rare. It's common. The only difference is, I looked into it. That line stuck. It was quoted in the Charlotte Observer, the News and Observer, and even appeared in an op-ed in The Atlantic titled, "HOAs have gone too far. It's time we fought back." Within 2 months, Senator Briggs introduced the Homeowner Accountability and Protection Act, HAPA. The proposed bill would require mandatory annual audits for all HOAs over 50 units, public access to all HOA financial records, term limits for board members, a statewide ombudsman office to handle complaints and mediate disputes, severe penalties for financial misconduct, including mandatory prison sentences for embezzlement. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A real start. Back in Oak Hill Lakes, the new reform committee was hard at work rewriting the bylaws. One of the first things they did was eliminate the ridiculous appearance fines that had triggered all this. No more $50 per day penalties for missing pine straw or mismatched fence paint. They also voted to cut board compensation entirely. No more stipends. Board service would now be voluntary, just like it was supposed to be. The community garden project I'd proposed took root fast, literally. Within 3 weeks, residents had transformed a useless strip of land behind the tennis courts into rows of vegetables, herbs, and native plants. What used to be an eyesore was now the most visited spot in the neighborhood. Kids came to plant carrots. Retirees tended tomatoes. Even folks who once kept to themselves showed up with bags of compost and a willingness to talk. It was the first time I saw true community in Oak Hill Lakes. But not everyone was happy. There were whispers that Brenda had made bail. Her lawyer was reportedly planning a legal counterstrike, trying to spin the story as a witch hunt against a misunderstood businesswoman. There were rumors of a lawsuit for defamation and character assassination. I wasn't worried. The evidence spoke for itself. So did the state investigators. Brenda had buried herself. Still, it was a reminder that even when you win the war, the battles don't always end. Then one day, I got a knock at my door. It was a man in a sharp suit, mid-40s, confident posture. He introduced himself as Nathan Rowe, a field agent with the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. "We're expanding our inquiry," he said flatly. "Turns out your HOA's mismanagement wasn't just limited to Oak Hill Lakes. We've identified a pattern involving other neighborhoods that use the same bookkeeper and similar vendors. Brenda McMillan might be part of a larger network." My jaw dropped. Apparently, the same landscaping company that billed us for services never rendered had been used in 4 other neighborhoods, all with similarly inflated invoices, all linked to Brenda's private LLC through shell companies. What you started, he told me, might be blowing the lid off a multi-million-dollar fraud ring. I didn't even know what to say. I just nodded, stunned. He handed me his card. "We might need your help again. You've got a knack for this." I wasn't looking to become an amateur detective, but part of me couldn't ignore the idea that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a fluke. Maybe this was bigger than anyone thought. Back inside, I poured a cup of coffee, stared out at my now weed-free lawn, and thought about everything that had happened, from a stupid fine to FBI involvement, from feeling helpless to helping thousands, from being the guy nobody noticed to the guy who helped change state law. And I wasn't done yet. I never imagined I'd be called to testify in federal court. I'd barely even stepped foot inside a courthouse before all of this. But sure enough, 6 weeks after my meeting with the FBI, I got the official subpoena. Brenda McMillan wasn't just facing state-level charges anymore. The federal government had picked up the case. Wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, racketeering. That last one stunned me. Racketeering? That was mafia stuff. But when I saw the court documents, it made sense. Brenda had been running a long con, stretching across multiple HOA boards, using fake vendors, shell corporations, and inside connections to funnel hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of dollars into personal accounts. She'd even bought a condo in Miami under a false name and had offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. And it all unraveled because I let a few weeds grow a little too tall. I arrived at the courthouse with a stack of spreadsheets, receipts, and statements I'd saved from the beginning. My lawyer, Ron, was with me. He wasn't technically required for me to testify, but he insisted on coming for moral support. He was also enjoying the circus. He'd never had a case snowball like this one. Brenda was there too. She looked thinner, older, and definitely not as smug as she used to be. Gone were the designer glasses and diamond brooches. Now she wore a beige suit, 2 sizes too big, and a court-appointed attorney with no sense of humor. The prosecution laid it out clearly for the jury. Brenda had created dummy companies like Southern Greens Landscaping LLC and Golden Valley Maintenance that submitted inflated invoices to HOAs she managed or had influence over. She signed the checks, moved money into the shell companies, and from there into personal accounts disguised as consulting fees. The scam went on for at least 7 years. I was called as a key witness. They had me walk the jury through how I'd first suspected something, how I pulled the public records, and how I'd uncovered the paper trail. The lead prosecutor, a sharp guy named Kenneth Wallace, had me explain it in layman's terms. When you found the same invoice numbers with different dates and amounts, what did that tell you? That someone was reusing the same documents and trying to make them look new. Like a lazy cheat, I replied. There were a few chuckles in the courtroom. Brenda avoided eye contact the entire time. But the real bombshell came when the FBI agent took the stand and confirmed everything. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, fake identities, even forged signatures from other board members. She was done. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. Guilty on all 17 counts. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 12. The judge even referred to her actions as deliberate, malicious, and corrosive to the concept of community. But that wasn't the end of it. See, once Brenda was convicted, the floodgates opened. Homeowners from every corner of the state started questioning their HOAs. Suddenly, audits were popping up left and right. New board elections were held. Lawsuits were filed. A whistleblower hotline set up by the state attorney general received over 3,000 complaints in its first month. I was contacted by 3 different neighborhood associations who wanted me to speak at their meetings about how to spot HOA fraud. One even offered to pay me. At first, I said no. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't an expert. I was just a guy who got mad enough to pull a few threads. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this whole thing had given me a voice, and maybe I could use it to help people. So I agreed to speak at one meeting, then another. Then I got invited to a homeowner advocacy conference in Atlanta. I went, gave a short talk called Weeds, Greed, and the HOA Machine, and sat down. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but someone had filmed the speech. It went viral. Within 2 weeks, I had over 50,000 subscribers on a YouTube channel I didn't even know I had. A guy named Chris, a cybersecurity analyst in Oregon, had created the channel for me and uploaded my speech. He said, "Dude, I didn't ask because I figured you'd say no. But people need to hear this." He wasn't wrong. People began messaging me from all over, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, telling me about HOA abuses that ranged from fines over garden gnomes to boards stealing money for vacations. And something clicked. If this problem was this big, why wasn't anyone doing anything about it? Sure, a few states had homeowner protection acts, but most of them were toothless. The industry was too protected, too under the radar. Most politicians didn't care because most HOAs kept things quiet and off the books. But now that Brenda's case had exploded into the public eye, there was momentum. So I launched a nonprofit, We the Residents. It started small, just me, a few volunteers, and a website. But within a month, we had over 10,000 members. People submitted their stories. We created a free database of HOA financial red flags. We connected people with pro bono legal help. And yes, we even developed a free HOA audit tool anyone could use. Reporters started calling again. A segment on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver featured HOA horror stories, including mine. They showed a picture of my yard, complete with the weeds that started it all, and said, "Never underestimate a homeowner with a Wi-Fi connection and a grudge." I laughed out loud when I saw that. But behind the humor, I knew something deeper had shifted. Oak Hill Lakes had changed too. We held elections, real ones, and we ended up with a balanced, fair-minded board. Half longtime residents, half new folks. All of them committed to transparency. We got rid of the overpaid vendors. We slashed annual dues by 20%. And we voted to remove punitive fines altogether. Instead, we introduced a Good Neighbor Fund, a voluntary contribution that supported elderly or struggling residents who needed help with upkeep. That fund, it worked better than anyone expected. People gave freely because they felt respected, not coerced. One Saturday, I sat on my porch and watched as a group of teenagers helped Mrs. Peterson, the 83-year-old widow across the street, plant wildflowers in her yard. No one fined her. No one complained. In fact, the board gave her a thank you card. That's what a neighborhood should be. But things weren't over yet. One morning, I got an encrypted email from someone claiming to have evidence that Brenda didn't act alone. They wrote, "Your HOA wasn't the only one. A former state contractor helped cover up the paper trail in exchange for kickbacks. I have the files. Interested?" I froze. If this was true, it meant this wasn't just about greedy board members. It meant government officials might have been in on it. It meant this rabbit hole went even deeper than anyone thought. I replied with a single word: yes. The email led to a burner file server hosted somewhere in Romania. I was nervous just opening the link, half expecting my laptop to catch fire or start mining crypto, but what I found there was something else entirely. Scanned contracts, wire transfers, fake vendor approvals, government approval stamps, even emails between Brenda McMillan and a name I didn't recognize at first. Stanley Rourke, a state-level auditor who had retired early 3 years ago. I dug in. Stanley Rourke wasn't just some paper pusher. He'd been the head of an oversight committee that rubber-stamped HOA budgets for the state's development grant program. Essentially, if an HOA applied for maintenance subsidies or disaster recovery reimbursements, he'd review the books and issue funds. Turns out he wasn't doing any real reviewing. Brenda had been sending him cooked numbers, phony maintenance reports, inflated damage assessments, fake environmental studies. In exchange, he'd greenlight the grant money, skim 10% off the top, and wire it to a separate LLC under his son's name. This wasn't just fraud. It was organized crime. There were dozens of HOAs involved across 5 counties. Some of them probably had no idea. They were just being used as shell entities to filter grant money. Others, full participants in the scam. I called Kenneth Wallace, the federal prosecutor from Brenda's trial, and asked if we could meet again. When I showed him the new files, his eyes widened. "I was wondering where all the missing pieces went," he muttered. "Looks like someone finally found the other half of the jigsaw." Within 24 hours, the DOJ issued new subpoenas. By the end of the week, 4 more people had been arrested. 2 others flipped and entered witness protection. Rourke tried to run, but he was caught at a private airstrip trying to board a plane to Panama. He had over $800,000 in cash, 3 fake passports, and a briefcase full of burner phones. They arrested him on the tarmac like something out of a spy movie. That moment made national news. CNN aired a full segment titled, "From HOA Fines to Federal Crimes: How One Homeowner Took Down a Statewide Fraud Ring." And somehow there I was again, sitting across from Anderson Cooper, talking about how my overgrown yard turned into a massive legal unraveling. It was surreal, but more than anything, it was vindicating. I didn't do it for fame. I didn't even do it for revenge anymore. I did it because somewhere along the way, I realized we were all vulnerable. Ordinary people trying to live peaceful lives, being shaken down by petty tyrants with clipboards and power complexes. We needed a system that protected us, not punished us. With new federal interest, the Senate launched an inquiry into HOA oversight nationwide. State legislatures proposed new laws, real reforms, things like mandatory third-party audits, capped fines, required board transparency, and term limits for board members. I was asked to testify again, this time in Washington, D.C. It felt absurd, walking into a marble government building in a suit, greeted by aides and secretaries like I was some expert. A few senators called me the guy who exposed the HOA mafia. I told them I wasn't a whistleblower by profession. I was a homeowner by necessity. And that's when I realized I had a role to play. So I went all in. I hired a small staff for We the Residents, including a former HUD compliance officer and 2 legal interns. We launched a hotline, a reporting system, and even started offering mini grants to homeowners fighting unfair HOAs. We got funding from unexpected places: tech founders, civil liberties groups, even celebrities. One day, I got a donation from Mark Cuban with a note that said, "No one should lose sleep over a mailbox being 3 inches too tall. Keep fighting the good fight." And we did. We helped an 82-year-old veteran in Florida keep his flagpole. We helped a single mom in Nevada win back $4,000 in illegal fines. We helped shut down a corrupt HOA in Arkansas that was billing residents for a pool that had been closed for a decade. The impact snowballed. Eventually, we worked with lawmakers to pass the Fair Neighborhood Act, which made HOA boards legally liable for financial mismanagement, required annual disclosures to all residents, and created a state-level ombudsman in every U.S. state within 5 years. That bill passed unanimously. I cried when I saw the president sign it, because it meant something, not just for me, or my street, or my weeds. It meant the little guy could win. That accountability wasn't some myth. That people like Brenda, people who used rules to control others and enrich themselves, could finally be held to account. Back in Oak Hill Lakes, life was normal again. Kids rode bikes without being hassled about helmets. People painted their houses in reasonable colors without receiving citations. And weeds? Well, let's just say they're not considered criminal offenses anymore. Sometimes I walk by the clubhouse, now renamed the Community Commons, and laugh. It used to be a place of fear, where board members issued punishments like little emperors. Now it hosts bingo nights, yoga classes, and free tax prep seminars. The HOA budget is public. The board rotates every 2 years. Every vendor contract is open to community vote. There's even a garden committee that encourages native plants and pollinator patches. Irony, right? The weeds that almost got me evicted became the inspiration for the neighborhood's most loved initiative. And me? I still mow my lawn, don't get me wrong, but every now and then I let a patch of wildflowers grow just a little too long. When someone asks why, I smile and say, "They're not weeds. They're a warning." Because somewhere out there, another Brenda is trying the same scam. But now she'll have a much harder time.